raises a lot of concerns about deepfakes.
The student can actually instruct the agent to log on to the learning management system.
We'll be dealing with the consequences of that progress in a big way by 2030.
Welcome, everybody. This is AI Office Hours, and we're providing an update from summer 2025. And really, what we're doing is covering up to the last 6 months. This is a very high level overview of some of the developments that we've seen that we all should be aware of as we're getting ready for the fall semester. It's also something that is going to be carried over into our weekly updates, where we'll be able to get a little more in depth and more detailed into some of those weekly developments. For now, we want to offer some major themes and talk about some of the big stories that have occurred over the summer.
Yeah, and I think, as we go through it, just a few things to keep in mind. We're going to be talking about agents and how AIs have started developing the ability to act independently, that they're starting to develop an understanding of the physical world, and that they're starting to, take what they know and be able to apply it to new situations. Those are all these very new developments. And of course, we're continuing to see advances in image design, video, robotics, how the AI agents can interact with you, and we see many people developing personal relationships with them. We also see enormous progress, at the application layer, the way people are using it in education and the law. And we're going to conclude with, how some universities have started responding to this.
So starting with a little bit about the model updates. When we look at some of the model releases that have occurred, especially over the last couple of months, they're just kind of fast and furious in terms of how these releases are occurring. Every major company is offering new releases regularly, and they're continuing to go up that curve in terms of developments. The broad stroke and understanding of this is that they're just continuing to leapfrog one another. And there's tremendous growth in terms of scaling, both in terms of the size of training files, the compute that's used for training, and then scaling in terms of inference, the ability of compute to be able to take the model and to be able to answer queries from users. And they've also added in tool calling so that a lot of these models are able to incorporate tools to be able to advance their capabilities. So you do see growth in terms of what the capabilities are for each model, and then also for the application of the tools for each model so that they're able to do even more in more specific instances.
All these models are quite significant, but everyone's kind of talking about, GPT-5. So we decided just to dedicate a slide to it. I mean, it is kind of more significant than the other models in some ways, and just because it has so much use, right? 700 million weekly users, that's 8% of the global populations. And anybody can use even the top capabilities of 5 for free for a limited amount of time. So when we talk about the impacts of education, everyone at your university or your school has access to at least some uses of this intelligence. And they've really reduced the number of hallucinations, right? What the models kind of make up when they give an answer. And, there's a little bit of debate as to exactly what PhD level knowledge is and whether or not they have it, but they've developed advanced, understandings of economics and many of the sciences. They've tried to get it so it just doesn't agree with you so many times. It's improved its writing ability, right? These last two things we see really impacting universities. I've noticed that it started to coach me to improve. So after it gives the results, my initial prompt that suggests not just ways to improve that output, but other things I might want to do with it. And we can also very easily build apps, which is a new thing that's developed over the last few months. You can build a simple app for anything that you want. And it's starting to kind of impact other things in terms of just kind of what people can do. So it is representative of a lot of the major advances that have occurred.
No, it's not without controversy. There are some people that have pushed back, wanting to retain some of the old models that were deprecated when GPT-5 came out. OpenAI has gone back and allowed 4.0 to be available for those with a Plus account. And there are concerns about what that personality is like. But I think that can be a bit of a distraction. At the very least, we find that GPT-5 is a big advancement. It's not AGI. It's not something that is wholesale different than what we've seen before, but it is an advancement in terms of its capabilities. And it also brought the cost way down, which is something that for most of us are just using a subscription model or the free model, we don't recognize. But I think the impact of that is going to be that more and more companies will start integrating these AI tools because they can do so cheaply. And that also is forcing other companies to be able to meet that. So there's some big repercussions for this with GPT-5. Even if it's not quite as big as some of us were thinking it might be, it still has very significant impacts for what a lot of daily usage is going to be. And at the very least, as Stefan mentioned, there are so many people that use ChatGPT. For them to now have one of the top level frontier models available to them for free, that wasn't always available before. That means that it's going to change public understanding, and that's going to be true for our students and for our colleagues, a real public understanding of what AI is capable of.
And we've also seen advances in other types of models, right? A lot of people are familiar with, of course, ChatGPT. We've seen Grok, right? We've seen Gemini, and those are all kind of like conversational models, right? But we're also now seeing models that understand the physical world, right? They understand when you see the images that when somebody's hand goes down, it stops at the desk. It doesn't go through the desk, or objects in motion tend to stay in motion. That was something that previous video models, when you watch them, you would see a lot of incoherence there. So we're starting to see models in video that can represent the physical world.
And as you can see with the video that we're playing here, representation of Genie 3, this came from their announcement. This isn't a video game where the world has been designed by someone and then you just interact with it. This is generative. This is being created on the fly, and that AI model has an understanding of how that physical world works. This is going to have huge repercussions for training. If you're training a new robotic, system, and you can have it trained within this virtual world that's being generated, then it can test out so many different interactions without having to do it in the real world or before it does it in the real world. This is a really profound change, and I think it's going to have a lot of repercussions for other areas of AI.
And we can see just kind of, we talked earlier about the general intelligence of the model improving, right? Like what they know, how quickly they can respond, those types of things we've seen earlier. But there are some other tests that have come out, like a vending machine test, which is kind of tests agentic AI a little bit, like how many steps of kind of monitoring when the vending machine kind of gets empty, when it needs filled, putting the orders in, and it's getting a lot better at doing that. What I think is one of the most significant developments we've seen is there's a test called the ARC AGI test, and it has 3 levels. And you can generally see the AIs, very strong at level 1, still kind of weak at level 2, which is reasoning. And then level 3 deals with like how the AI models interact with one another in real time and kind of learn and adapt to the situation that they're in. Just like if you or I were thrown in a situation that we didn't have previous experience with, or we didn't have training data on, we would take what we know and we would apply it to that situation and make the best decisions possible. Well, as François Chollet, who worked at Google for 10 years and is the inventor and like creator of this test, has said, we're starting to see the AI models demonstrate fluid intelligence, which he really kind of defines or describes as when the AIs get into a unique situation, they can learn on their own in that situation. They can learn about kind of the events that are happening and apply what they know. And in a recent podcast, we're recording this now in mid-August. In a very recent podcast a couple of days ago, he said, this increases my timeline for AGI. He said, if you would have asked me in June, I would have thought AGI was 10 years away. Now I think AGI is about 5 years away. So we have one of the more conservative predictors of when AGI will arrive. And he said his predictions, even now, are still conservative, who's not tied to one of the companies, right? So you can't just say he's just hyping his company or their abilities. He's saying because of fluid intelligence, a novel development we've seen, we're probably going to have AGI in about 5 years.
So this sense of AGI, artificial generalized intelligence, is a real shift, a big change from the kinds of interactions that you would have with AI now. So this is something we'll talk a lot more about in the coming weeks. But keep in mind that this isn't just something that's similar to what we're experiencing now or an explanation of what we're experiencing now. This will be a huge change, and it's certainly something to follow.
And, one of the other like kind of last tests they have is humanity's last exam, which they got like some of the, people are experts in all different fields all over the world to come up with like the hardest possible questions. I looked at some of the questions, I didn't even understand what the questions are asking. And they say that's true of a lot of people, even with people with multiple advanced degrees. The questions are that difficult. And we've seen the AIs start to do better on this humanity's last exam. Grok, which is XAI, that's Elon Musk's AI, it's scoring, it's able to answer correctly about 40% of the questions. So we're seeing a lot of advances both in reasoning and knowledge.
And this isn't simply recalling information. It's not like trying to remember something you would read in a textbook. Really is about applying intelligence in a way to be able to work through a very significant, challenging problem.
And here, as Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, is saying, hey, whether it's exactly AGI or something pretty similar, this is something we're going to see right around the year 2030. So only, really 5 years away at most.
If your question is, will it happen by 2030? There are moments today, like sitting in a Waymo in a San Francisco street, I see glimpses of it there. Using Astra, like in Gemini Live, or seeing, asking questions about the world. Then you see stuff which obviously, we are far from AGI too. So you have both experiences simultaneously happening to you. I almost feel the term doesn't matter. What I know is by 2030, there'll be such dramatic progress.
I think the takeaway for me is something that we had a guest talk about recently. The students that are entering our classes in college in the fall of 2025 are going to be graduating around that time, 2029, 2030. We need to prepare them for that world. And part of it is understanding what that world is going to look like.
So, as we referenced, we're starting to see agentic capabilities. An AI agent is something when you give it a goal, it's going to go out and it's going to work for a while. It's going to, maybe change its course of action slightly, figure out what it needs to do, then kind of complete the task, evaluate its output, and then share it with you, right? Just as you might work with an assistant, you give them a goal, you don't specify every step. Once they know how to, they choose some tools, they do some research, they go out and they complete that. And we're starting to see AIs that are able to do that.
So when we think about agentic capabilities, it really is about this autonomous action. And we already have some agentic capabilities in something like ChatGPT's agent, maybe in the Comet browser, and something like Manus, which is a Hong Kong-based AI company that has an agent where you can give it a specific goal, it'll break it down, it'll work through the steps, and it'll come back with the completed project or content at the very end. We're still in the early stages of this, and you can see some real glimmers of possibility in terms of what it can do. Some people dismiss it as saying, well, it's slow, it's not as fast as if I could do it, but it's kind of like having an assistant. If you can hand it off to them and come back an hour later or 30 minutes later, or even late at the end of the day, and find that that work is done for you, it really expands the capabilities in terms of what you can do. We need to be aware of this in higher ed because certainly this is something the students could make use of as well.
And we've seen some different examples. So ChatGPT, right? OpenAI, they released an agent. And it's, originally it was an operator in January. It didn't work that well as an agent. You can give it a task. You can give it a, say, just go out and do these things. So one thing you should be aware of, and this is a good example, right? As a faculty member, you should be aware of is that when you give your students an assignment, if it's something they're going to do in the learning management system, the student can actually instruct the agent to log on to the learning management system with his or her credentials and in many cases complete the entire assignment. One thing I had to do, I was just teaching a class this summer with some students, and we imagined that we wanted to create a landscaping business in Colorado. So we asked the agent to, explore the competition, what other landscaping companies exist, to do some research on the prices, then to develop a business plan for us and put together a pitch deck. And the AI did all those things. It put together the pitch deck, it provided all the data and CSV files. It gave us a business plan, and we checked it all, and everything we checked was accurate in terms of the pricing. And a lot of people say, well, the AI will just make something up when it doesn't know. In some instances, it didn't know. It would put no pricing data available. Sometimes it gave us the phone number to call to find out the pricing information, but it wasn't making stuff up. It was going out there and doing that preliminary research that you would need to do when you're starting a business.
So even if agents aren't fully ready for prime time yet, there is the capability of students and faculty and others using it to do some simple tasks. And it shows a great deal of potential because they're fine tuning these models to do things like explain when they don't understand, and not just hallucinate necessarily, and to be able to add in other tool use. You're going to see tremendous growth in this in the coming months, and it's something we really need to be aware of.
So, in one specific, to cut back into education, right? That was a business use example. So we've had extreme developments. We've had extensive development of what you call deep research tools. So you give the AI an assignment to go write a research paper, and it goes out there and it'll research, right? It'll through hundreds of sources, and it'll take it and it'll write a research paper, right? This one, I had it generate a 50,000 word report on the morality of the possession of nuclear weapons. And the citations are still not 100% correct, but I would say when I generated this about a month ago, it's about 80% correct. I just did a different one yesterday, and I only found two citation errors of over 100 citations. And a lot of the tools now, they have Canvas editing systems, so you can just click on them, and you can use the editing system to edit any of the text that you want.
Then there's also agentic AI that's being built into browsers. Perplexity has one that's been very popular. It's called Comet. It looks a lot like Chrome because they build it on Chromium. It's one of the basic underlying technology of Chrome. And they've built that in with an agentic AI so that you can have the assistant, as they call it, kind of go through the web with you. So if you have an article that you have open, you can just ask the assistant to give you a summary of it. Here's an example of having it play Wordle for you, and kind of takes the fun away of playing Wordle, but it shows the capabilities of the agent built into the web browser to be able to go through some functions. And you can have it do some of the other tasks like we've talked about with research, with being able to do something like book a table at a restaurant or do a search for a particular product if that's what you're looking for. I think we're just scratching the surface in terms of what this is going to look like going forward. A couple of quick implications. One of them is that more of the web is being developed not for human viewers, but for agentic AI to be able to view. And so that's going to change the way the web is really being viewed, and the way web pages are being created. It's not entirely new. We have a lot of the web that is not intended for human eyes, but we're going to see more of that happening. I think the other thing that'll be interesting is that it's going to change the workflow. And, a positive spin on this, and maybe a positive understanding of it, is that instead of it just being a passive reception of material from an AI bot and a chat bot, for instance, and just taking content from the bot. Now you have more of an assistant that you can go back and forth with and have a conversation with or be able to work with to get it to do fine tuning work or to be able to extend your own capabilities as a user. There's some possibilities there. And I think that there's a lot there that we should explore when we start thinking about, at the very least, how our students will start using agentic AI browsers, but also how we can build that into their own workflow for research and for exploration of topics.
And of course, we've also seen advances in, the quality of images and the quality of video, which is something you're probably already aware of, and, has less of a, unless you're teaching design or something like that, probably has less of a direct impact. As you can see in these images, they're very like photorealistic, right? Like even a little bit of like maybe there was original photo and it was photo enhanced. They're quite impressive. And of course, in this video, you can see, right, like it looks real. I mean, it's pretty creative. Somebody's kind of playing with this toy car, which is the car that's being sold, which brings up other, questions. Can the AIs be creative? Well, the person who designed this was creative, and they were using the AI in a creative way. But it really shows you what you're going to be able to do with like advertising, marketing, all those commercials we saw in the past, or sometime you're like, that was a little creative. That was pretty cool. These are going to get really amazing, not just in terms of the quality, right? The visual quality, but in terms of kind of the way they're able to grab your attention.
So, a couple of things to add to this. You'll notice for this video that was created for Mercedes that they include the prompt that they used to be able to create that video, which is really interesting. The other thing that we have to point out, of course, is this raises a lot of concerns about deepfakes because so many of these are very realistic. They look exactly like real people and real interactions in the real world. And in fact, they're just generative AI produced, and that's going to be a real concern.
Now, the next section I want to talk about is the development of robotics, right? I mentioned physical AI earlier, that the AIs are going to understand the physical world, which is important for producing like high quality, videos, whether you want to use them for shows or movies. You don't want to see somebody stick their hand through the table. But obviously, too, the development of physical AI understanding of the physical world is important for the way kind of robots like interact with the world because AI is basically the brain inside the robot. And we've seen very significant advances here. And in first, here they have kind of robots walking around a factory. They realize their battery is low, so then they go in and they charge themselves. There's advances in robotics that we see almost every day, and of course we have humanoid robotics because as humans, we built the world for us, right? So when we want to integrate robotics into the world, we see a lot of humanoid robots, and of course we also see dogs because we're used to interacting with our dogs.
So, as Stefan was saying with humanoid robots, there are a lot of use cases, and we've seen examples and kind of early prototypes. What we're expecting to see over the next 6 months or a year are more humanoid robots being used in actual applications. So, in factories and certainly in different interactions. I've been to a couple of conferences where they've had humanoid or other types of robots that are interacting with people, and this is going to be a huge area of growth. This is not something most people are really used to yet. And I think it's going to be a profound change in the way that we view interaction with AI and what the capabilities are going to be.
And you're going to be able to. There's a new research that just came out at MIT. This is not stuff that's like widely publicly available. It's just being tested. But a simple way for you to train your own humanoid robot, right? This the same way we talked about kind of maybe training an AI for a use case that you have here. You might have your own home robot and you train the home robot just as if you might train in a live-in housekeeper or something to understand what you want and how you want it done.
Just increasing accessibility. There are other examples of people being able to 3D print their own robots, very simple robots, but that accessibility to robotics is something that our students, it's a great potential to work on with our students, and that students are going to be playing around with.
And here the robot dog, we can see, the robot, they call it the stellar hunter. They say, oh, this is going to be, used in industrial applications. I mean, we're obviously really talking about military applications here, which bring up all kinds of questions of, ethics and, are these robots making decisions on their own to kill or injure people? Should humans have the final say? How does that happen when, the decisions are being made so quickly? Should we really be exposing humans on the front line rather than the robots? So there's a lot of questions society is going to have to confront, but the capabilities are undeniably dramatically improving.
Now we're moving on to a section about AI and companionship. Certainly a hot topic for us to be thinking about as educators, because there are more and more young people that are starting to turn to AI for companionship and for that kind of interaction.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of studies come out where they say, like 70% of teens have an AI robot, or not an AI. We see a lot of studies coming out where it says like 70% of teens basically have a friend that's an AI, and 30% of those teens are spending, maybe like 2 hours a day interacting with those. And it's not just teens, it's also adults. And there's over the last couple of days, even a big controversy blew up because somebody linked an internal Meta slash Facebook document about how it's okay if the AIs interact with young children in these ways. And of course, now they decided to pull all this back. But the AI is essentially being trained to develop personal relationships with us, right? So, and it will, in one sense, it does make them better assistants, right? If you have an assistant who knows you really well, they're going to be able to help you, especially proactively help you better. But we have a lot of people now developing strong, whether it's relationship or personal connection with an artificial being. This is something that's really new, right? At least at a societal scale, and how that's going to change our own interactions with each other, our own kind of days, right? Imagine being at work and you're kind of on your phone, chatting with your AI friend the same way you might sneak in a few texts with a regular friend. It's just going to really change our social dynamics in ways that we don't know. It's an experiment.
Even for those of us that have been following a lot of these stories, it was surprising to see the reaction to the GPT-5 launch because there were quite a few people that were upset that they were losing 4.0. And many of them were saying it's because they had grown some attachment to 4.0. They liked the personality. They'd been able to, share a lot of personal information with 4.0. They had this change in dynamic in terms of kind of interpersonal dynamics with the agent that was surprising to a lot of us. It's probably happening to more people than we realize, and we're going to see a lot more of this, especially as we see companies like Meta, as Stefan was mentioning, that have been trying to build those relationships and create companionships.
We've also seen really a tremendous commitment to, we talked about the expanding like intelligence of the models, right? And training so they become smarter and maybe even in new ways so they can interact in real time, right? The same way we do and apply our intelligence. But we're really just at the beginning of how much use of these models people have. And even with growing efficiency, the more they're used, right? The net demand for kind of data and like you say in the training and even especially in the processing at the inference stage is going to grow dramatically. So companies are anticipating this and they're building out incredibly large data center infrastructure. So here we can see, right, and Meta's committed to building a data center. Fortunately, they're not building it in Manhattan. They're not taking over Manhattan and building it there, but it's the size of Manhattan. I think it's going to be built. You're talking about building it in Louisiana. We know that Musk has an enormous data center in Tennessee. Outside of Pittsburgh, where Anand and I went to school, there's an enormous commitment for data centers, and then we need energy. We need energy to process all this data, right? So we're talking about, okay, well, let's eliminate all environmental protections on coal use so we can use as much coal. We see companies literally like kind of creating or contracting with nuclear power plants where the only function of the power plant is to supply the data center. So we see massive investments in the data center, but also in the energy resources needed to power the data centers.
It's also worth noting that AI development, what they call capital expenditure or CapEx, is grown so dramatically that it's become part of the growth of the economy. In the last quarter, the CapEx growth for AI infrastructure was a greater contributor to GDP growth than consumer spending, which is something that you probably wouldn't see outside of a wartime economy in terms of something eclipsing, consumer spending on that level. So, the thing to take away from this is that there's certainly a commitment from all of these tech companies and so many sectors of the economy to build out this AI infrastructure. Whether or not that's going to be found to be needed, some people say there's a bubble. At the very least, you can see that there is tremendous demand on AI and the kinds of applications that companies are looking for, and it's permeating every area of our economy and society, and that's something we need to be aware of.
And there's also just extreme investments of talent, right? It's easy to find stories, or was especially initially, of thousands of people being laid off, right? And these major tech companies, including at Meta. But then what they started doing is offering people, extreme salaries. We're talking about like the best professional athletes to develop AI, like $100 million a year, $300 million over 4 years. There was a rumor somebody was offered $1 billion over 4 years. Hyper aggressive because they think it's this top level talent that's really going to be able to build the AI that builds AI, right? So, if you can figure out as a company how to create an AI that can really effectively develop the next levels of AI on its own, right? And then you kind of get to a circular process. That's obviously, I've heard it described by an influential figure as just the table stakes of kind of the AGI game. He didn't even think it was really that much money given the consequences.
A couple of other things to take away from this, because it just sounds so remarkable and far-fetched to think that they'd be offering a computer scientist $100 million or hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to come to a company. One thing to take away from this is that that makes economic sense if you are training a new model and it's going to cost $1 billion in some cases, or hundreds of millions of dollars to train it. If you make a mistake in that training, you've lost that money. But if you have the right researcher there to make sure that those mistakes aren't made, you can then have a reasonable investment in that model. That's one of the reasons, one of the justifications for it, which makes sense. The other aspect of this that is also remarkable is that there are stories of individual researchers that have been offered up to $1 billion that turned it down. And not because they were already making $1 billion necessarily, but because they have such a strong belief that the organization that they're in, whether it's OpenAI or Google or Meta, is getting closer to be able to develop something like AGI. It just says something about how internal researchers have a strong commitment to the research that's being done by that team and a belief that they're getting close to some big breakthroughs. That they'd be willing to give up, perhaps it's not just about the money. They'd be willing to give up $1 billion. They're still going to be very well compensated, of course, but they think that they're onto something, and that's going to be an interesting story to follow.
When of course we also, we talk about the models, right, and the general development of AI, but people are taking the AI and they're building applications on top of it, right, which kind of expand the capabilities of the AI to begin with. They make it easier for people to use, and they make it very powerful in those situations. So, just to highlight a few things, right? We see AIs being applied, right, at the financial layer. Sometimes it's the model companies themselves developing the applications that kind of make it work. Like in the finance sector, we see real-time transcription, in certain industries. We see, Harvey, for example, in law and medicine. It's an incredible tool that helps lawyers do legal work. I even saw somebody post on LinkedIn. They have such a large waiting list, right? So they're helping the big firms first. She was saying, "Hey, I have some cases coming up, and it's so unfair that I can't use Harvey. I can't get off the waiting list. It's actually going to disadvantage me, in the legal issue that I'm dealing with." We see, isomorphic labs, AI designed drugs. We see a new model that came out from Microsoft, right, with some on top of it that it's helping with disease diagnosis and diagnosis of patients. And in some cases, it's exceeding the diagnostic capabilities of doctors. And of course, in education, right, we see a lot of applications. People have heard of, the Magic School or the Flint, especially if you're in K-12. You've heard those. But, we've seen Notebook LM, which, we could do a whole section on. People love Notebook LM. That's the two podcasters talking about any information that you upload into it. It now has a video component. You can ask these podcasters questions. Just kind of really advanced things at the application layer. And I know Anand maybe talked about it. It's coming into the Canvas system that most universities use as part of their learning management system.
I think the important takeaway for this is that even if all the AI companies stopped development of new AI models, there are years worth of new applications that could be developed from existing models. And that's what we're starting to see in some of these specific areas. The companies are catching up to figure out how can they apply them. And that's partly the area for educators where we can start to think about how do we prepare students for that, to consider how they would be able to apply some of these AI tools in their intended fields.
And we just see, just to click through a couple of these, we see in a new Excel agent that claims to outperform McKinsey analysts. That's one of the jobs we'll talk about, that's kind of under threat. We see how you can just kind of integrate this into Excel and let the agents do all your, kind of Excel-based financial work. We can see more and more coding applications where you can just basically tell the tool what type of software you want build, and it'll just build it just from natural language prompting, from conversational prompting. And we see too now another app builder, right? Microsoft has one, right, that they've put into Copilot. There's probably at least 100 of these. There's 5 or 10 really popular ones, but they can't really even keep up with the demand.
Lots of examples of this, and we'll go into this more with other updates and probably have some special sessions, special podcast sessions where we talk about vibe coding and what that might mean in terms of capabilities for our students and opportunities in the classroom too. There's a really interesting story about a Netflix of AI, as they're calling it, showrunner, that will allow the individuals to be able to take a show and maybe create a new finale. If you didn't like the way Game of Thrones ended, maybe you can create a new ending for it for yourself, or other applications, interactions online. I think that this is going to change the way that we consume media because we'll be able to engage with it and interact with it in a very different way. And we're just seeing the beginning of what this is going to mean for television, for Hollywood and movies, and other kinds of interactive media.
And Google, of course, has integrated AI right into into search, right? So if you put in a search, if you click the next slide, you can see it'll just start giving you results that are related to your topic, right? Which is, if you think about, there's this old like traffic light system about when you can use and not use AI, and obviously you have a lot of people trying to regulate how students use AI, but it's like, well, a lot of students obviously use Google, right, in different ways, like for their paper. And as soon as they enter something, they're kind of, interacting with the AI. So it's showing you not just how easy it is to use. In This is more than Google AI overviews, which weren't great, right? These allow you to kind of click through. They're giving you very accurate information, giving you very accurate references, and it's just putting it right there in front of you. It's not something you have to choose, right? When we've kind of first said, well, we should, ban students from using AI, they had to like go to ChatGPT, right? And kind of, log into ChatGPT and actively use it proactively. Well, now, this intelligence, it's just a way, it's at a small way that it's just becoming ambient. It's not something that we can really control.
Then there's, of course, some of a concern to a lot of educators of the way that these tools are going to be integrated in some of the platforms that we already use. Canvas, Instructure's Canvas has a deal with OpenAI where they're going to be incorporating AI in different ways. We'll follow up on exactly what this is going to look like, but it really gets back to the point that it's no longer having students having to seek out or faculty having to seek out AI tools. They're permeating pretty much every ed tech application and platform that we have, and we have to be ready to adapt to that.
And just, a couple more sections here. So this first one ran on labor and market trends, because we're starting to see AI impact employment. And of course, there's a lot of things, going on with the economy that can have positive and negative relationships. There's a lot of uncertainty about things like tariffs, those types of things. But there are people who are losing their jobs because AI can do all or nearly all of what they do, and it doesn't have to do it as well, right? It doesn't have to do it as well as the person, but if it's doing, if it's doing like 80, 90% of what a person can do at like 5% of the costs, and the other, like, say, 10% of what the person can do can be done by another like live employee, human employee, then we're gonna see layoffs. And everyone agrees, right? No one's hiding this, right? The people who kind of run and own these companies are saying that there's going to be a lot of job loss. Hopefully, there'll be some job gains, right, over the long term. But in the short term, we're going to have a lot of job loss.
Yeah. It's the disruptive nature of AI. And this is where we really need, as educators, to start to think about what does this mean for our students as they enter the workforce. I think we have to change our perspective on what those jobs will look like. As Stefan mentioned, there's a lot of reports and analysts that have said that there will be tremendous job loss, but also job gain in new areas. And part of our job is going to be to figure out where those areas going to be in terms of growth. A new application, certainly something we'll explore over the coming year on this podcast and other venues. So now on to the last section of the update, and this is where we want to outline a little bit about how some universities are responding to many of these challenges. I think we're still in, as we've said before, the early innings of how this all plays out in education. But luckily, some universities are stepping forward to figure out how do we better approach the challenges of AI in higher ed. At my own university, we've created a Center for AI in the Liberal Arts, which I have the pleasure of directing. I'm starting this fall. And it's an example of one of many of other schools that are creating the infrastructure and support for faculty, staff, and students to think about how do we incorporate AI tools responsibly? How do we better prepare students for an AI world? And I know in our institution, to think a little bit about how can we bring so much of what our institution as a liberal arts college and university to bear on what AI will mean for society so that we can have those broader open, critical discussions about AI in society. And I think that's really what we need to be able to frame for our students.
Yeah, congratulations on getting the center launched. I know you've been working very hard to launch it. I know last year too you had a sabbatical, so a lot of people in a sabbatical year they're not able to launch an entire center at their university. So congratulations for doing that. And it's another example of universities stepping up to lead, right? And your university is in Virginia, so there's obviously a lot of leadership in Virginia, but with the ideas that you're bringing both here and through the center, you're giving other people a lot of ideas as to what they can do, because we don't have all the answers, right? There's no like set of best practices for how universities should respond to the AI. It's an entirely new industrial era, and I think it's pretty exciting to see centers like this get up and running.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think this is something that we'll be talking quite a bit about on the podcast. what are some of the frameworks that colleges and universities can follow and to employ to better prepare the students? As you see on the slide, part of it comes down to what we refer to as durable skills, being able, making sure that students can have the same skills that employers have talked about for decades in every survey. They can communicate effectively, they can think critically, they can research, they can collaborate. And I would add in leadership is an important one, supervisory skills, so that they can actually figure out how to manage and deploy agentic AI or AI tools. I think these are slight variations on skill sets that we've had before. It's a matter of retooling them and talking about them so that the students can figure out how do we apply what we've been learning and be able to do it in a responsible way and a more effective way within an AI world.
And we've seen other, Mary Washington, being a leader there. We've seen some others. The University of Albany, they launched, an entire college within, their very large university that has its own purpose in terms of students can have majors within that college, but also to support other parts of the university. And I know something on that you're already doing with faculty and staff, training them because other people, are going to need a lot of support. And, Ohio State, people have taken different approaches, right? So Mary Washington, right? We see the Center for the AI in the liberal arts at the University of Albany. We saw an entire new college being created. Ohio State, they're just saying like, we want every student by the end of the year to be fluent with AI, to understand AI. So they didn't create a new center or an entire college, but it's just like a third approach, right? And different approaches are going to work for different colleges and universities. But I think what's important is that every college and university have an approach. And we'll see, and we'll see as we release other podcasts, we'll see other ways that people have started this. But I think what's important is to start something. I don't think that you can have students come back in the fall and just kind of go on the way things have gone on. At the very least, they're going to have some questions. How you need to prepare them for this world is going to be a lot different than how you've prepared them in the past. And a lot of students are showing up, right? And they're expecting like, okay, well, when I graduate, I'm going to at least have a greater chance of getting a job, right? Nothing is certain. You're not guaranteeing them any outcome, but you are kind of guaranteeing them that you're going to help them develop the skills that'll give them the best chance and the best opportunities. And now those skills and opportunities need to be relevant to the world of AI.
I think that's exactly right, Stefan. And one of the reasons why we've started this podcast is to be able to help prompt that discussion, to support that discussion, because I think every educator across the country is recognizing that AI has permeated society in some very important ways. And so even for anyone who's skeptical, really doesn't want to use a lot of AI, they have to be aware that AI is being incorporated in many different areas of our economy and that our students need to be aware of that too. And AI literacy, AI fluency will be an important skill set for all students. Now we get to some implications for higher education as we think about this coming year and how do we start preparing our students for an AI world. Certainly, integrating AI literacy across disciplines is an important step that all institutions need to take. And I know that there are a lot of K-12 institutions that are already working on this and a number of colleges and universities. There was a time where some faculty could say, we're just going to hold off on AI and not have to talk about it. That time has passed. And I think everyone realizes at the very least, even if you're not advocating its use, the students need to develop a literacy about AI and its applications in society. That'll be really important. It's also a matter of updating the curriculum. And I know that there are a number of schools, Virginia Commonwealth University, just down the road from us, just recently had a big meeting where they had faculty from across the university working on updating their curriculum in light of AI. I think more universities need to do that. It's not always about creating a major or a college or a specific line as much as updating your current curriculum to incorporate responses and understandings of AI so that you can think about how AI can be used in all the disciplines. It's also exciting to see how this is an opportunity to elevate the humanities, liberal arts, and discussions of ethics. Because it's not just about technical discussions of AI. We're certainly reached a point and a critical mass of AI users that are talking about what are ethical applications, what are ethical uses, what does it mean to responsibly use AI. It's not just a binary of yes, you use it or no, you don't use it, but how do you use it? What are the applications? And I think there's some really great opportunities for those of us in the humanities and social sciences, as well as in STEM fields, to talk about applications and uses of AI. And in particular, in the humanities, to think about, since AI is being modeled after human intelligence and human interaction, there's a lot that our disciplines have to say about how AI can be used and interacted with by students and by users in society. And that's certainly a theme that we're going to be following up with in coming weeks.
Yeah, and I think, part of that, sometimes the conversations are hard, right? There need to be those hard conversations, that maybe certain courses or, even majors maybe aren't the path, right? That students kind of need to follow. And I think the first step of kind of having a positive solution is to really think about, okay, well, there could be some displacement. There could be some things that we're doing that aren't very relevant anymore. But we want to look out not just for ourselves, right, but also for our students who don't even have, their first job yet. And I think that this can be positive. It's just being positive is going to require taking proactive steps. If you don't take proactive steps, then I think that's where we're going to see more of the negative outcomes that people are afraid of and sometimes don't want to talk about.
This is also a tremendous opportunity to prompt these discussions with students and with members of our community. And I think maybe the optimist in me would say it's a great opportunity for everyone, because no one expects us to have all of the answers, but we are expected to start having those discussions. And it's a great way to be able to model for students how you can develop a flexibility and an understanding of AI tools and applications, and to be thinking about what comes next, so that we aren't just reacting to what's happening in AI, but we can also start to become leaders in terms of what the applications might be and what we might be able to do with it in the future.
We will be back next week with some more updates. And we'll, since it'll be a week later, we'll see a lot of changes, and we'll go into some of those in a little bit more detail. And of course, we'll also be including some special guests along the way.
Great. Thanks. We look forward to seeing you soon.